Hey everybody, how's it going? It's me, Logan, aka Suburban Yinzer. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about where my Southern blood came from and why my Southern ancestors came to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, it's no mystery that I have Confederate blood in me, that I have Southern ancestry. But how am I, as a Yankee from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, how do I have this bloodline? Where did it come from? Okay, because many people up here in the North, they don't have Southern bloodlines. They don't have Confederate ancestors. I'm not saying that all don't, but most don't. Okay, it's a very complex, extraordinary thing to be a Yankee for multiple generations of Yankee blood. And then all of a sudden, bam, Dixie comes in, and then there's a branch of the family tree or multiple branches that are Southern, okay? And for people that are outside the United States that don't understand, there is and there will always be a rivalry between the North and the South. That is because of the Civil War. But it's very strange with this huge country we live in, a huge, ginormous country, that you would have people from that deep down in that region of the South coming all the way up into the North. Well, me personally, my ancestors were named the Pontins, okay? And they came from a little corner in the Blue Ridge Mountains called Massies Mill in Nelson County, Virginia, okay? And my ancestors lived in Virginia since it was settled in 1607, okay, from England. My ancestry, going all the way back into Europe, is English, Ulster Scottish, primarily Northern Ireland, and then German, some German. But mostly English, Scottish, Ulster Scots, okay? So Anglo-Saxon, okay, Protestants. And these people came to Virginia, the colony of Virginia, in the 1600s, and they lived there from the 1600s all the way to the late 1800s, and even further, if you were talking about different branches. But as for me, my great-great-grandparents were named Samuel and Lula Ponton, and they were, as I call them, the grandchildren of the Confederacy. So, Grandma and Grandpa Ponton, as we call them, they were like the pioneers of Pittsburgh, okay? The Pittsburgh pioneers of their bloodline. They were the first people of their bloodline to move outside of the South, meaning to leave their ancestral homeland of Virginia and come up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a foreign place, basically, a place that is very hostile and very foreign to the Southern man. But my great-great-grandparents, their grandparents, so my fourth great-grandparents, or grandfathers to be specific, were Confederate veterans, okay? So the reason why my great-great-grandparents, Samuel and Lula Ponton, we call them Sam and Lulu, that was their nicknames. The reason why they left Massies Mill, Virginia, is because of the Civil War, okay? The Civil War, by the time they were growing up in Virginia, was only 20 years before them. So it took decades to basically bring back the economy and the infrastructure of the South, especially of Virginia, because Virginia was so brutalized during the Civil War by the Union Army and the Army of Northern Virginia and the Army of the Potomac, and, you know, all of these different armies and different battles and different circumstances absolutely wreaked havoc on the South, especially Virginia. And so my great-great-grandparents were living in a place that was so basically dilapidated. Okay, it was turned upside down economically. The infrastructure was gone. There was no jobs. There was no prosperity. There was no future in Virginia in the 1880s and 90s and early 1900s. So my great-great-grandparents, Samuel and Lula Ponton, they got married in 1902, okay? And they got married down in North Carolina. But my great-great-grandfather, Samuel Ponton, he was already living in Pittsburgh by the late 1890s, early 1900s. Grandpa Ponton moved from Massies Mill up to Pittsburgh in, I would say, the late 19th century, early 20th century, working as a iron worker, okay? And an iron worker, for somebody like him in his situation, being from the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, that was good pay. That was stable pay, especially in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the Steel City, okay, the industrial city of Pittsburgh. It was like a magnet for men like him that needed the work, that needed the prosperity, that needed basically the comfort. So they needed to come to Pittsburgh to survive and to thrive. So after my great-great-grandparents got married in 1902, they went back to Virginia, got a wagon, and then rode up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with their twin children. Okay, the first children, so my great aunt and uncle. Okay, my great aunt and uncle sadly died when they were babies on the way up to Pittsburgh, and while in Pittsburgh, I don't know the circumstances, but they were very young when they passed away. And so the reason why I know most of these stories, though, the little footnote, is because my grandmother's first cousin still lives in the original house up in Overbrook, a little neighborhood in Pittsburgh that my great-great-grandparents lived in from the late 19-teens, early 1920s to present day. The house is still there, still occupied by the family. It's fantastic. But regardless, my great-great-grandparents moved to Pittsburgh, and this is where they lived for multiple decades, raising their children here, raising their grandchildren. And my great-great-grandfather built and owned the house in Overbrook. Okay, that's still standing today. It's still occupied by the family today. But regardless, when my great-great-grandparents came up to Pittsburgh, they settled on the South Side slopes approximately from 1903 to 1918. So they lived on the slopes of the South Side. And my great-great-grandparents were like foreigners up here in the beginning. They didn't fit in at all. They were like aliens to this culture, to this society. Because back in the early 1900s, there was such a cultural and basically a cultural divide. Okay, let's just say that. The perspective was that the South was backward and the North was basically civilized. Okay, the South was barbaric and the North was civilized. So when my great-great-grandparents came up to this civilized industrial civilization, these mountain people from the Blue Ridge Mountains that basically pick tobacco leaves and dry tobacco leaves in their basement. The people up here thought that my great-great-grandparents were a bunch of backward mountain people, rednecks from the Blue Ridge Mountains. So my great-great-grandparents really didn't fit in to the society early on. It was a very huge undertaking to be able to assimilate to this Yankee society. And so while my great-great-grandfather was working on the bridges as an iron worker, building the infrastructure of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he decided to acquire his own property, basically his farmland, on a hill up in Overbrook, right above Brookline, and that was called Ponton Hill. He was the first inhabitant of that property in 1918, 1919, and by 1920, the early 20s, that's when he finished the house up there on Ponton Hill in Overbrook. And so my great-great-grandparents lived up there from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. And my grandmother's first cousin said when she lived there from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, she slept over there every summer. She said it was like a farm. They basically brought that agricultural, agrarian, simple Southern culture and state of mind and perspective up here to the north. They grew watermelon. They grew not tobacco. They couldn't grow tobacco in this climate, but they would grow all kinds of crops. They depended on themselves rather than depending on, let's just say, grocery stores or supermarkets or other people to grow and to acquire food for them. They grew their own food like they did down in Virginia. Because many Indians probably know this or don't know this, but Southerners are very, very self-determined people. Okay, they're very reliant on themselves. They're very independent, especially if you compare it to the Yankees, some like the cities like Chicago, New York, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Boston. If you live in that city industrial state of mind and perspective, you're not going to be as independent and self-reliant because you have the supermarket, you have the grocery store, you have these other third parties to take care of you. But when you're living in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia in Nelson County, okay, nobody's going to scratch your back when your nearest neighbor is a mile away. Nobody's going to take care of you and feed you and clothe you, okay? So my great-great-grandparents took that mindset, that agrarian Virginian mindset, and brought it up to Pittsburgh. And that's why they were self-reliant. They hardly went down to grocery stores and supermarkets. They didn't believe in it. You didn't go spend your money with some Yankee boy down the street. And you didn't go and spend your hard-earned money on fruits and vegetables and grains. Okay? You had to be so desperate to need something in order to go spend your hard-earned money with a Yankee supermarket owner. Know what I mean? They believed in self-reliance and independence of the self, meaning that we're going to grow our own food. We're going to harvest our own food. And not only this, but my great-great-grandfather, Sam, he traveled down to Virginia every single year for decades. He never forgot about his Southern blood. Never. He was always in contact with his Southern relatives and Southern bloodlines. Okay? So, Grandpa Ponton would travel down to Virginia for multiple reasons, just, to visit his family and friends down in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Massies Mill, but also to acquire his Virginia tobacco, okay? And tobacco, for many Indians that don't realize, especially back in the 1800s and 1900s, if you are a Virginian, especially, if you are from the Blue Ridge Mountains, tobacco was like the lifeblood, okay, of that region. That is why the English settled the Virginia colony in the 1600s, because of the thriving amount of tobacco. Okay, tobacco was like the king crop for centuries. But Virginians, like my great-great-grandfather, they learned to love and to acquire this product or this crop. So when my great-great-grandfather went down to Virginia, he would get his own homegrown tobacco leaves from his family and friends. Get these tobacco leaves and then bring them back up to Pittsburgh to his home in Overbrook. And him and his wife, Grandma Ponton, because they were, native Virginians, they did this for decades. They would hang the tobacco leaves down in the basement from the ceiling. My grandma's first cousin told me this. It's amazing. Back in the 40s, they would hang the leaves down just like they did in Virginia, and they would dry them down in the basement and dry the leaves until they were bone dry. And then he would take them and then crush them and then sprinkle them. You know what I mean? Like, make them fine. You know what I mean? You got to take the leaves, you got to crush them and rip them, tear them, grind them down until it's like real fine tobacco, particles. And then what he would do, not only would he smoke the pipe, not only would he smoke his pipe, but also he took the tobacco leaves and moistened them with different liquids, like ciders or syrups, and it would moisten them, roll them up, and then put them in his lip, and he'd chew to the tobacco while smoking a pipe. These stories, ladies and gentlemen, are so precious to me, because when I look at the pictures of my great-great-grandparents, especially my great-great-grandpa Ponton, Samuel Ponton, and I see his pipe, and I can imagine him chewing his tobacco leaf, go down to get that Yankee tobacco down there. I love it, because as a Yankee, as a northern boy from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it's so awesome to be able to have this information and to have this special bloodline and special connection to Virginia and to the Blue Ridge Mountains. And so, one more story. Grandma Ponton had a brother named Wid. Okay, she named her son Wid, but then she had a brother named Wid. There was Big Wid and Little Wid. So Big Wid was her brother, a couple years younger than her, or not a couple, almost 10 or 11 years younger than her. And Uncle Wid, my great-great-uncle, was in a bluegrass band, a family bluegrass band from the Massies Mill area of Nelson County, Virginia. He, his wife, and his children, they played bluegrass. Blue Ridge Mountain bluegrass with the banjo and the fiddle. Oh my God. Like, that music is like the lifeblood of my family. It is still ingrained in the DNA of my family. When my mother hears that music, my mother says there is something about that music that is like a magnet to my family. It is like, when you hear that banjo, oh my God. I love it. And so back to Uncle Wid. So my great-great-uncle Wid was a World War I veteran. And so during the 1930s, 40s, 50s, he would come up with his family to Overbrook, to Pittsburgh from Virginia. And him and his family would come up with the bluegrass band, and a couple other friends too from the Blue Ridge Mountains that played, the instruments too. And they would come up to the front porch. And my grandmother's first cousin said when she was a little kid, she would sit on the front porch with Grandma and Grandpa Ponton, many other the relatives, the aunts and uncles and the cousins, and they would sit up on that front porch. Grandpa Ponton would be smoking his pipe, and then Uncle Wid, his wife, and his kids. Oh my God, could you imagine? Oh, oh my God, I love it. And that's the thing. It's the culture. It's not only the culture, but it's the identity. It's the background. And when hearing my cousin my grandma's first cousin telling me these stories about the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, the bluegrass, the banjo, the fiddle, all the way up here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Yankee headquarters, United States, the northern section of the country, but then hearing these mountain people from the Blue Ridge Mountains of Massies Mill, Virginia, coming up here to their front porch, playing their banjos, playing the fiddle, smoking the tobacco leaves from Virginia, it literally is beautiful. And what I did once was I went onto the front porch because, as I said, my relatives still live in that house. I visit it every year. And I sit on that front porch, the same front porch in Overbrook, right above Brookline. And I sit on that front porch and I put my headphones in. Like, I play legitimate Appalachia or Blue Ridge Mountain bluegrass with the banjo and the fiddle, you know what I mean? And then I listen to that and I blast it. And I could just look around and see them. Grandma and Grandpa Ponton, Uncle Wid, his wife and his kids, my cousins, my aunts, Aunt Dimp, Aunt Ott, Uncle Wid, Uncle Chuck, Uncle Roy, Grandma May, all of them, all of the Virginia descendants, sitting on that front porch in the 40s and the 50s, listening to that. Oh my God. And I get the goosebumps because this is not like me posing as a Yankee boy. This isn't me saying like I want to be Southern, but it's not that I want to be. It's as I am. This blood runs through my veins. The bluegrass, the Blue Ridge Mountains, the culture, the identity. It is something you can never erase. Even if you lived up here your whole life and you are a Yankee through and through, you cannot deny that your people, that your ancestors, that your culture is from a different place. In my circumstance, it's Virginia. And when I went down there this summer, I went down there the first time. This is the last story, I swear to God. So when I went down to the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, we went down to Virginia, and I begged my parents. I said, please, let's go to the Blue Ridge Mountains. Let's go visit Massies Mill. Let's go visit the cemetery up in the mountains. And let's visit my ancestors and their graves, and let's see it for the first time. We, a bunch of Yankees from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we drove up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, losing our signal Our cellular data went gone. We're up in the middle of the Blue Ridge Mountains. We're in the middle of nowhere, basically. There's no civilization anywhere. We're in Virginia. We're in the heart of the mountains, okay? And we visited Jonesboro Cemetery up there. And I got to see the gravestone of my third great-grandmother, Jenny Ponton, Grandma Ponton's mother, who died in Virginia, and many other of the cousins, the names, the Pontons, the Harveys, the Fortunes, all of these relatives and ancestors, the gravestones. And I thought to myself, this is home. This is where they came from. This is where it all started. From the Blue Ridge Mountains, from Massies Mill to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was there. I was in the headquarters. I was in the epicenter of where my family started in 1902 when they decided to come to Pittsburgh in 1903. And for me personally, as a Yankee from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I am not ashamed. I am not embarrassed. I am not dishonored. I am so proud to be of that blood, to be a descendant of Virginia, to be a descendant of the South, to have Confederate ancestors, to have bluegrass, Blue Ridge Mountain genes running through my veins. It is literally a culture and an identity that I will never take for granted and that I will always love and appreciate. So, thank you guys so much for watching this very long video, but I hope you enjoyed it. And I'd like to wish you a great day, and peace.